But I haven't allowed myself the luxury of egotism, and it would be silly to stand here.
He made America laugh for 70 years without ever raising his voice. A master of silence, innocence, and gentle comedy, Red Skelton seemed untouched by darkness. But that image hid a life shaped by pressure, criticism, and unstable marriages. But even that turmoil was nothing in comparison to the heartbreaking tragedy that entered his life so suddenly, so devastatingly, that it fractured him in ways no spotlight could hide. He kept performing. He kept smiling. But from that moment on, Red Skelton was never the same, and almost no one noticed. The first tragedy Red Skelton faced. To generations of Americans, Red Skelton represented something rare and comforting. His comedy felt safe, gentle, almost timeless. He broke rules without ever seeming rebellious, relied on silence as much as words, and made millions laugh without cruelty or shock. What audiences didn't see was that comedy was never just entertainment for him. It was survival, a way to live with loss that arrived before his life had even properly begun. Red Skelton was born Richard Bernard Skelton on July 18, 1913, in Vincennes, Indiana. However, just 2 months before he was born, his father, Joseph E. Skelton, had died. Joseph was a clown with the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus, a performer who never lived to see his youngest son take his first breath. Red grew up without a father, and this absence shaped everything about his life. His mother, Ida May Fields Skelton, was left to raise Red and his 3 older brothers alone. The family lived in extreme poverty. There was no safety net, no stability, and no space for childhood fantasy. Red understood from an early age that survival came before comfort. By the time he was 7, he was selling newspapers on the street to help keep food on the table. That street corner became his first stage. At age 10, while selling papers outside a theater, Red caught the attention of popular stage actor Ed Wynn. Wynn bought all of the boy's newspapers, then brought him backstage. It was a small gesture, but it changed everything. Red saw performers preparing, joking, and becoming someone else before stepping into the spotlight. For the first time, entertainment felt reachable. By around 14, Red dropped out entirely to pursue performing. He took whatever work he could find: medicine shows, minstrel shows, vaudeville houses, burlesque acts, showboats, and circuses. The pay was inconsistent, the conditions rough, but it was work that rewarded timing, observation, and emotional instinct. As a teenager, Red joined the same circus his father had once worked for. It wasn't sentimentality that drew him there, it was familiarity. By 15, he was traveling full-time across the Midwest, performing wherever audiences gathered. He learned how to read rooms, how to hold attention without dialogue, and how to fail quickly and recover faster. Those skills became his foundation. Vaudeville sharpened his instincts. Red developed pantomime routines and clown characters that relied on physical expression rather than punchlines. Silence became his strength. It allowed him to communicate emotion without explanation, something that would later define his career. In 1937, Red broke into radio, appearing on NBC's Avalon Time. Radio forced him to learn precision. Without physical movement, he had to create worlds through voice alone. The audience response was immediate. His sketches stood out, and national attention followed. By the 1940s, Hollywood took notice. Red signed with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and appeared in more than 30 films, including Whistling in the Dark, Ship Ahoy, and The Fuller Brush Man. His screen persona was approachable, unthreatening, and quietly clever. Television expanded his reach even further. In 1951, The Red Skelton Show debuted on CBS. It would later be renamed The Red Skelton Hour and run for 20 years, one of the longest-running variety shows in television history. Week after week, Red introduced characters that became cultural fixtures: Freddie the Freeloader, Clem Cadiddlehopper, and George Appleby. They were outsiders, dreamers, and innocents, figures who struggled but endured. His style remained consistent: pantomime, slapstick, humor that families could share without fear. He earned multiple Emmy Awards and received 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one for radio and one for television. His career stretched across 70 years, from 1923 to 1993. Offstage, Red supported U.S. troops during World War II and Vietnam, performing for servicemen who needed distraction more than applause. He became known for his emotional recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance, carefully explaining each word's meaning. Later in life, he turned to painting, especially images of clowns. His artwork sold for high prices and revealed a quieter side of his creativity. In 1989, he was inducted into the International Clown Hall of Fame, completing a legacy his father never lived to see. But beneath all of it, every laugh, every character, every silent pause, was a boy shaped by early loss. Comedy had given Red Skelton purpose, but it also became a shield. And long after success arrived, tragedy would return in a way that comedy could no longer protect him from. Shadows behind the fame. For more than 2 decades, Red Skelton carried one of the heaviest burdens in American television. Hosting The Red Skelton Show was not just a job. It was a relentless cycle of invention. Every season demanded new sketches, fresh characters, and material that could satisfy families across generations. Week after week, Skelton delivered, often at the expense of his own health. Behind the painted smile and deliberate pauses, exhaustion accumulated quietly. Those close to him later described a man who hid fatigue and sadness behind his comedic mask. Skelton rarely complained publicly. Instead, he worked. He rehearsed obsessively, refined routines late into the night, and demanded precision from himself long after others would have stepped back. Comedy was expected to come easily from him. Only a few recognized how much effort it actually required. Critics, meanwhile, struggled to categorize him. One remark followed him for years. He was described as a mime whose greatest success was on the radio. The irony was unmistakable. Mime depended on movement and silence, yet his breakthrough came through sound alone. To Skelton, the contradiction made sense. He believed emotion mattered more than medium. To critics, it highlighted a disconnect between his style and the direction entertainment was heading. By the late 1950s and into the 60s, comedy was changing. Verbal wit, satire, and sharper social commentary were becoming dominant. Skelton, however, remained rooted in slapstick, pantomime, and character-driven innocence. Some critics labeled his work old-fashioned. Others dismissed it as simplistic. He was often described as a folk humorist who was warm, accessible, and nostalgic at a time when American entertainment was becoming more urban, intellectual, and ironic. That tension was never resolved. Audiences continued to adore him. His ratings remained strong. Families welcomed him into their homes every week. But critical opinion grew increasingly divided. Skelton sensed it. He felt the distance widening between what he valued and what the industry now celebrated. But nowhere was that divide more visible than in his relationship with network executives. Skelton's show ran for 20 years on CBS, an extraordinary achievement. Yet the longevity did not protect him from conflict. He frequently clashed with executives over creative decisions, scheduling, and the direction of the program. Skelton believed deeply in consistency. He resisted sudden changes designed to chase trends. Executives, on the other hand, were increasingly focused on demographics. In 1970, CBS made a decision that stunned Skelton. Despite solid ratings and a loyal audience, the network canceled the Red Skelton Hour. The stated reason was a shift toward younger viewers. Skelton took the cancellation personally. After decades of loyalty, he felt discarded. He spoke openly about his disappointment, framing the decision not as business, but as betrayal. Determined to continue, he moved the show to NBC for the 1970 to 1971 season. But the momentum was gone. The format struggled to find its footing, and the cultural moment had shifted further away from his sensibility. The revival failed. For Skelton, it marked a painful turning point. The industry he had helped shape no longer seemed to have room for him. The professional strain was compounded by financial disputes that simmered beneath the surface for years. Despite his success, Skelton found himself in repeated conflicts with networks and producers over contracts and syndication rights. He was fiercely protective of his work. Ownership mattered to him, not just financially, but emotionally. He viewed his characters and routines as personal creations, not disposable content. That insistence on control often put him at odds with producers and executives. Negotiations became tense. Legal disagreements dragged on. While Skelton was far from impoverished, the stress of fighting for what he believed he deserved took a toll. The battles reinforced his sense that loyalty in Hollywood was conditional. That pressure soon began to affect his personal life and relationships with people. Skelton was a perfectionist. He expected discipline and commitment from those around him, just as he demanded it from himself. Colleagues sometimes found him difficult, not because he was cruel, but because he was exacting. He rehearsed endlessly. He corrected details others overlooked. When things didn't meet his standards, frustration followed. At the same time, he remained deeply private. Fame never translated into openness. He guarded his inner life carefully, often appearing aloof or distant outside of performance. Balancing that privacy with the constant visibility of television became increasingly difficult. Sadly, by the late 1960s, the entertainment landscape had shifted decisively. Youth-oriented, edgier programming dominated the airwaves. Comedy grew louder, faster, and more provocative. Skelton's wholesome, family-centered humor stood in quiet opposition to that trend. He was urged to modernize, to sharpen his material, and to adapt. He refused. For Skelton, changing his style would have meant abandoning the very language he had spent a lifetime perfecting. He believed sincerity still mattered. That innocence still had value. Even as the industry moved on, he held his ground. But holding ground came at a cost. As professional recognition faded and criticism intensified, the emotional strain he had long concealed grew heavier. And while audiences still loved him, the pressures of fame, combined with personal expectations, began to fracture something much closer to home. Because behind the public smile, another struggle was unfolding quietly. One that would touch his marriages, his family, and ultimately his heart. Red Skelton's marital struggles. Behind Red Skelton's carefully controlled public image was a personal life shaped by work, loyalty, and long stretches of emotional distance. Red Skelton tied the knot 3 different times, but those marriages were not ruined by scandal or infidelity, but by the slow strain of a career that consumed nearly everything else. Each relationship reflected a different phase of his life and revealed how tightly his identity was bound to his work. His first marriage began before fame, before money, and before security of any kind. Red Skelton married Edna Marie Stilwell in 1931. He was only 18 years old. Edna had been born on May 25, 1915, in Missouri, and worked as an usherette at Lowe's Theater in Kansas City. Red met her while performing there during his early years on the road, when his future was far from certain. At first, Edna was unimpressed by him, but over time she became one of his strongest supporters. Their marriage quickly became more than a personal partnership. Edna stepped into Red's professional life in a way few spouses ever have. She became his agent, his head writer, and his manager, guiding his routines, shaping his material, and helping him navigate the unstable world of live performance. At a time when Red lacked formal education and business experience, Edna provided structure and direction. They had no children together. Their lives revolved almost entirely around work. As Red's career gained momentum, the boundaries between marriage and business disappeared. Creative disagreements blended with personal ones. Long tours, constant rehearsals, and the pressure to succeed left little space for intimacy that wasn't tied to performance. In 1943, after 12 years of marriage, they divorced. Yet the end of the marriage did not sever their connection. Remarkably, Edna continued working with Red professionally for years afterward. The bond they shared had evolved into something primarily creative and practical. Romance had faded, but mutual respect remained. Their relationship suggested that for Red, partnership often meant collaboration first and everything else second. 2 years later, Red married again. In 1945, he wed Georgia Davis, born September 17, 1921, in Colorado. They met through Hollywood circles during Red's rise in the 1940s, as his career transitioned from radio to film and then television. Their marriage was formalized on March 9, 1945, and coincided with Red's ascent into mainstream stardom. Georgia's role in Red's life was markedly different from Edna's. She was not involved in managing his career or shaping his material. Instead, she focused on creating stability at home. Together, they had 2 children, Valentina Marie Skelton, born in 1947, and Richard Freeman Skelton Jr., born in 1948. This period represented Red's most visible success. The Red Skelton Show dominated television, and his schedule was relentless. Georgia managed the household and raised the children largely out of the public eye. While Red was adored by millions, the demands of weekly television meant long hours, constant pressure, and emotional unavailability at home. Their marriage lasted 26 years, a long union by Hollywood standards. But longevity did not mean ease. As Red became more consumed by his work and increasingly resistant to change, emotional distance grew. The same perfectionism that fueled his career made personal compromise difficult. By the late 1960s, as industry pressures mounted and professional disappointment set in, the strain deepened. In 1971, Red and Georgia divorced. The separation marked the end of his most conventional family life. Though not publicly bitter, the divorce reflected years of quiet imbalance. Red remained devoted to his children, but his ability to express affection consistently had long been shaped by absence. 2 years later, Red entered his third and final marriage. In 1973, he married Lothian Toland, the daughter of renowned cinematographer Greg Toland, best known for his work on Citizen Kane. By this time, Red was no longer chasing stardom. He was an established figure navigating the later stages of a long career. Lothian brought companionship rather than ambition. Their relationship unfolded away from the pressures of building success or raising young children. They had no children together. Instead, their marriage centered on shared routines and mutual understanding. Lothian provided steadiness during a period when Red's professional world had narrowed and his emotional world had grown quieter. This marriage endured. Unlike his previous unions, it did not end in divorce. Lothian remained with Red until his death in 1997, making it his longest-lasting partnership. In many ways, it was the relationship least defined by performance or expectation. Across all three marriages, there was a consistent pattern. Red Skelton was deeply loyal, but often distant. He gave fully to his work, sometimes at the expense of emotional presence. His partners adapted in different ways, by managing his career, maintaining the household, or offering quiet companionship. None of these marriages were marked by scandal. There were no public affairs or tabloid dramas. Instead, the strain came from something subtler. A life shaped by relentless performance, emotional restraint, and an inability to slow down even for those closest to him. And yet, even these marital struggles were not what ultimately changed Red Skelton forever. That moment came through a loss so devastating that no amount of discipline, humor, or silence could contain it. That was the tragedy that finally broke him. The tragedy that broke him. For all the loss Red Skelton had learned to live with, nothing prepared him for what happened in the 1950s. This was not a hardship he could outrun with work or soften with humor. It arrived quietly, settled into his home, and stayed. And once it took hold, it never truly left him. Red's son, Richard Freeman Skelton Jr., born in 1948, was diagnosed with leukemia at a very young age. At the time, the word itself carried a different weight. In the 1950s, childhood leukemia was poorly understood and brutally limited in treatment options. There were no modern protocols, no reliable long-term remissions, and little doctors could offer beyond hope and observation. For Red and his wife, Georgia, life became divided into hospital visits and waiting rooms. Richard Jr. spent much of his final year moving in and out of medical care, including long stays at UCLA Medical Center. Red continued working during this period, often commuting between studio sets and hospital corridors. To the public, nothing appeared different. The show went on. The characters appeared on time. The laughter remained intact. Behind the scenes, Red's life was quietly unraveling. Those close to Red recalled seeing him cry backstage, moments before stepping in front of an audience. He rarely spoke about his son publicly. Instead, he performed. Laughter, he later explained, became the only way he knew how to survive the pain. It was not denial, it was endurance. As Richard Jr.'s condition worsened, Red tried to create moments of normalcy where he could. Knowing his son's birthday was approaching, he brought him a Sears Roebuck catalog so he could choose gifts, the way other children did. Richard flipped through the pages carefully. He selected camping gear and a red blanket. Simple things, chosen quietly, without excitement. On May 10, 1958, just days before his 10th birthday, Richard Freeman Skelton Jr. died. In his final moments, his concern was not for himself. He reportedly asked his father to get a blanket for his mother, worried she might be cold. The request stayed with Red for the rest of his life. It was the kind of memory that never softened with time. After his son's death, Red returned to television. The Red Skelton Show continued. Audiences laughed, unaware that something essential had been lost. Red never allowed the tragedy to surface on screen. His comedy remained gentle, careful, and almost protective. But those who knew him noticed a shift. The humor slowed. The silences grew longer. The innocence took on a heavier edge. Privately, the loss hollowed him out. Georgia Skelton struggled deeply after their son's death. Grief reshaped her life in ways that never fully healed. Years passed, but the weight remained. Friends described her as carrying the loss quietly, without resolution. The marriage endured for a time, but the emotional strain was constant. In 1971, Red and Georgia divorced. The separation reflected many pressures, but the loss of their child stood at the center of it all. For Red, the tragedy changed how he viewed his work. Comedy no longer felt like ambition. It became an obligation, something he owed audiences, even when his private world felt unbearable. He continued performing, touring, and appearing on television. But the joy others saw was no longer uncomplicated. Exactly 18 years after Richard Jr.'s death, in 1976, Georgia Davis passed away under very tragic circumstances in Rancho Mirage, California. The date was not lost on those who knew her. She was 54 years old. Her death was later understood as the result of long-term grief and emotional suffering that never found relief. She was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park. For Red Skelton, the coincidence of the date was devastating. The same day that had taken his son now marked the loss of his former wife, the mother of that child. It reinforced a sense that the tragedy had never truly ended. It had simply changed form. In later years, Red spoke carefully about grief. He did not dramatize it. He did not assign meaning to it. He acknowledged it as something permanent. Comedy, he said, did not cure pain. It simply made it possible to keep living with it. Those who watched his performances after 1958 often remarked on a subtle difference they couldn't quite name. The humor was still precise. The timing was still flawless. But something fragile lingered beneath it. His characters, especially the silent ones, seemed lonelier, more aware. Red Skelton lived for nearly 4 decades after losing his son. He achieved honors, recognition, and lasting fame. But those closest to him understood that the man who existed before May 1958 never fully returned. The loss reshaped everything that followed, including his marriages, his work, and his silences. And in his final years, as his health declined and the spotlight faded, that grief remained close. Because some tragedies don't end careers. They end innocence. And Red Skelton carried that ending with him to the very last chapter of his life. Red's heartbreaking final years. In the final chapter of Red Skelton's life, the laughter that once defined him became quieter, more distant. The energy that carried him through vaudeville stages, radio studios, and television sets slowly gave way to physical limitation. Fame had never insulated him from pain, and in his later years, it offered little protection from solitude. Skelton's health declined steadily as he aged. He suffered from ongoing respiratory problems that made breathing increasingly difficult. Hospitalizations became more frequent, often prompted by breathing complications that left him weak and exhausted. By the mid-1990s, his condition had worsened to the point that public appearances were rare and carefully limited. Alongside these respiratory issues, Skelton was also battling diabetes. The illness quietly affected multiple aspects of his health, contributing to circulatory problems and overall frailty. Diabetes brought complications that were difficult to manage in later life, including fatigue, vulnerability to infection, and strain on the heart. Each setback narrowed his world further. As his body weakened, his public presence faded. The man who once commanded weekly television audiences now lived largely away from view. Invitations declined. Interviews became infrequent. The spotlight moved on, as it always does. What remained was time, long stretches of it, and memory. Despite his legendary status, Skelton's later years were marked by loneliness. He carried the compounded grief of losing his son Richard and his second wife, Georgia Davis. Losses separated by nearly 2 decades, yet emotionally inseparable. Those closest to him described him as gentle, polite, and deeply private. He was not bitter. He was simply withdrawn. Rather than seek attention, Skelton turned inward. He spent hours painting clowns, figures that had followed him throughout his life. The paintings were not exaggerated or theatrical. They were quiet, often reflective. Collectors later noted the sadness beneath the color, the way the eyes of the clowns seemed to look past the viewer rather than perform for them. Writing also became a refuge. Skelton filled notebooks with thoughts, memories, and reflections. These were not meant for audiences. They were a way to organize a life that had given so much outwardly while holding so much back. Many fans later observed that his most famous characters, Freddie the Freeloader and Junior the Mean Whittle Kid, felt different in retrospect. What once seemed purely playful began to look like armor. Innocence became a mask. Silence became a language. The humor that had comforted millions now appeared to be a shield he had built early and never put down. Red Skelton died on September 17, 1997, in Rancho Mirage, Riverside County, California. He was 84 years old. His passing was quiet, consistent with how he had lived in his later years. There were no final performances, no dramatic farewell. Just an ending shaped by age, illness, and the weight of memory. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, interred in the great mausoleum, Memorial Terrace, sanctuary of benediction. The setting reflected the dignity of a man whose career had spanned 7 decades and nearly every major form of American entertainment. Obituaries appeared across the United States, recounting a life that moved from medicine shows to national television. Writers emphasized his longevity in vaudeville, radio, film, and television, and his rare ability to adapt without losing his identity. Fans wrote letters and tributes recalling childhood evenings spent laughing with their families, calling him their favorite comedian. Fellow entertainers praised his discipline and humility. Many noted that Skelton never chased trends or mocked audiences. He trusted simplicity. He trusted silence. He trusted sincerity. Colleagues often remarked on his patriotism, recalling his careful, emotional explanation of the Pledge of Allegiance, an act that reflected not performance, but belief. In the years following his death, Skelton's artwork gained renewed attention. His clown paintings became highly valued, not just as collectibles, but as windows into his inner life. Critics and admirers alike began to see them as emotional self-portraits and expressions of humor intertwined with grief. Red Skelton left behind an extraordinary legacy. He made millions laugh without cruelty. He entertained across generations without cynicism. Yet behind the applause was a man who carried profound loss quietly and never fully set it down. His final years were not triumphant. They were reflective, solitary, and human. And perhaps that is what makes his story endure. Not just the laughter he gave the world, but the dignity with which he carried pain long after the cameras stopped rolling. What's your favorite memory of Red Skelton? Let us know in the comments section. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you never miss any of our videos. For more interesting content like this, check out the next video on your screen.